Oh, I think we're live. All right, hello, Kriegsspiel world. It's Marshall. We are back with another coffee kegs in Kriegsspiel, and I was just enjoying my Ottoman coffee or Turkish coffee. Very sweet. I think I put too much sugar in it. But hey, nobody cares about that. Let's talk about what we do care about, which is Kriegsspiel. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the turn cycle, or what I call the cadence. And we're going to talk about, I think it's a really common problem that a lot of people have when running games, which is how do I keep these turns short and concise and keep the game moving? So we're going to talk about that. Real quick, I put in the YouTube comments our Patreon link. I'm trying to get one or two more subscribers. Um, if folks will come on here to patreon.com/Kriegspiel, hit subscribe, and become a supporter of the IKS and our podcast to keep good content like this coming. So, again, if you like this content, if you value it, come on in here and support us. Anybody who becomes a Patreon subscriber will be added to the K22 rule book, meaning that you'll get access to our rule set that was written for the K22 system based on the way that we play and run our games. And that's something that I've been selling for $20 each. You get it just for being a Patreon. So please, I encourage you to come on in there and be a supporter. All right. Hey, Robert is first. Well, hello, Robert. Good to see you. All right, guys. Let's talk about the turn cycle or the cadence in Kriegsspiel. You have here on the screen a well, it's a screenshot, and it looks like it's like the first contact or first battle screenshot of a game that I played yesterday. Again, run by Justin. Boy, does he have this grid dark on there. You can see that grid all over. That grid is important. That allows us to gauge distances, and it allows us to eyeball movements without having to use a ruler. And he put on a very good scenario. In this scenario, you have a force here, and it's basically, think of it as a medieval battle. I'm not going to get into the politics of the red versus blue campaign or the details. But you have the gray force here with some red blocks, which are basically mercenaries who are fighting with them. They have muskets. Everybody else is sword and spear and bow and arrow, basically medieval technology. And you have a pretty good line here for gray. And black is coming in heavy on the flanks, but they also have elite troops in the center. And what black ended up doing was kind of brute forcing through the center. Down in the south, you have some cavalry, which is unmatched. In fact, there's no other cavalry on the field. That cavalry, which I commanded, punched through in the south. But up here in the north, they were able to bend back this line, and they were ultimately able to punch through in the center, which led to a black victory in this battle. Now, the turns in the battle processed relatively in good time, relatively quickly, 10 minutes, 15 minutes for a lot of turns. And then I think the last turn took 40 minutes to run. And there are reasons for this. One of the reasons is just look at the number of blocks that are out here. You've got, I mean, I'm not even going to count them, but you have a lot of blocks. And if even half of those blocks are engaged and they're rolling dice, it takes time to roll each die. Because when you are adjudicating a battle, you have to take a look at the opposing forces, and then you have to decide, well, what die are you going to roll? What are the modifiers for the die? And roll the die and then process the result. And sometimes processing the result has a whole bunch of additional duties. For example, if a unit is disrupted or whatever, you have to put disruption markers on it. If a unit takes a loss, you have to reduce the unit size, or you change the unit state to reflect that it's broken. If you want to check morale, morale is a big thing for a lot of people, and they want to check morale, so they do it as subsequent die roll for morale. They might do a die roll for advance after combat or retreat or whatever. The problem is, and this is this thing that I call minutia, and minutia is this catch-all basket term that I have for all of these things that people tend to layer into their Kriegsspiel. And the problem, of course, is that it adds up because a lot of people will sit there and say, well, it's only one more die roll. How long does it take to roll a die? And you're right, it only takes a couple seconds. But if you add a couple seconds per block, now you've got 1 or 2 minutes that's added to the game. And then if you have to fiddle around and fumble with things, and there's exceptions and other rules and other things, all of a sudden, what should have only taken maybe a couple more minutes is actually going to take 5, 10, 15 minutes or whatever. There's a couple of problems with long turns. I'm going to turn this screen off. We'll go to our module here. Actually, because I'm probably not going to illustrate a lot, I'll just go talking head mode here. Sorry to subject you to that. The problem with long turns is that, first of all, you want to get through a whole battle. And you can't get through a whole battle in just 4 or 5 or 6 turns. Usually you need at least 8 turns. I think we got 7 turns in yesterday's game. And the reason that Justin got away with running a 7-turn game, he might have had 8 turns, but I think it was 7 from my count. I'm not very good at math, okay? So if it was 8, I apologize. But the problem with the 7-turn game is that it's not enough to get to a resolution. Justin got away with it because it was a pitched battle scenario. In other words, both sides were already in contact with each other, and basically it was just cross that little no man's land in between and start fighting. There was no march to contact or maneuver that had to happen. But in most Kriegsspiels, you need multiple turns to get march to contact and maneuver. In the K22 system, one of the things that I do is I get the orders from the players ahead of time, and I basically say what's the route that you want to take to get to your objective. So I'll say, here's your objective here. What's the route that you want to take to get there? And they'll draw something out on the map and say, I want to go this way, or I want to go this way, whatever. And then I fast forward the game until we get to the point where they come into contact or they see the enemy. And then I begin taking turns from there. So that's one way to speed up the cadence or the turn cycle. But yeah, there's a lot of players who will give you a report here, they give you a report here, give you a report here, a report here. Well, there's 4 or 5 turns. And again, if each of those turns takes 10 minutes, and I haven't seen too many turns take less than 10 minutes. 10 minutes is a really short turn cycle. It's great, actually. It's ideal. The players don't get too bored. It moves pretty quick. But, 1, 2, that's 40, 50 minutes. That's an hour. And remember that people have limited time to play these games. This is not, the Prussian military academy where your students have to sit there and play the game to completion until you're satisfied. This is, a hobby where people are like, you know what, I've got to go. I've got to go. I have to go to the mall. My wife wants to go shopping, and someone's got to hold the purse. That's me, so I'm gone. What can you do as an umpire, right? There's nothing you can do. And if the game drags on for 6, 8, 12 hours, players are going to drop out. So ideally, the ideal game length seems to be 3 to 4 hours. Although early on in the IKS days we had games that went 6 or 8 hours. Now we're kind of getting it down to the 3 or 4 hour mark. But again, the way that we do this is we've got to have discipline in the turn cycle. We've got to get rid of the minutia. That's one of the big things we do. All of these little things that cause extra dice to be rolled, we got to eliminate all of those things. We can't have that because it just adds up. I know that people will sit there and say, well, I want players to make do with, this side has rifles, this side has smoothbores. And I want to take that into account. And maybe I want to count casualties. I want to mark off casualties the same way the Prussians did in the original Kriegsspiel and say, oh, you took some hits, so that's 10 guys. Okay, whatever. Again, that doesn't really enhance the enjoyment of the exercise. People think it's going to add enjoyment, but it doesn't, right? It's one of these things. It's kind of counterintuitive. As wargamers, we like that level of grognard type minutia, but it actually doesn't pay off. It's like playing Twister, right? You know the old game Twister with the dots, and you spin the thing, and oh, put your hand over here, right? You think that's going to end with everybody getting hooked up. It doesn't. It's just an embarrassing mess, and it's a complete failure. So it's the same way with adding minutia to your Kriegsspiel. You can model all of these things, but at the end of the day, it doesn't make that much of a difference. All it does is lengthen the turns, which means now you get fewer turns, which means now less of the battle gets played out. And you end up having to call the battle early, which is disappointing and unsatisfying for the players. So you have to strike this happy balance where you have the fog of war, you have the delayed order implementation, you have all of the things that make a Kriegsspiel without getting into the details that stretch it out for hours and hours and hours. Now, these comments pertain specifically to live Kriegsspiels, right? If you're playing by post, you do have time to track all of the minutia. And that's just fine. But again, if you're playing a live game, you want to get those turns down to 10 minutes. That's the holy grail. If you can get to 10 minutes or even less, wow, that's phenomenal. In reality, 15 minutes is acceptable. 20 minutes is pushing it. 20 minutes is just about the longest you should allow a turn cycle to take. 30, 40 minutes, you can get away with that every now and then if you have a particularly big turn or big scenario, and there are ways to manage that. So some more tips here. One of the things is you don't want to give players a lot of blocks. If we go back to what I was commanding yesterday in my game, let me come back to that screenshot. I was commanding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 blocks, plus my avatar piece. There was 1 or 2 avatars, but that's really pushing it. When you give players a lot of elements to command, they will begin to command the blocks individually. And they'll say, well, I want these guys to go out here and these guys to go over there. And even I did some of that myself. I was like, well, I want the skirmishers over here on the far left with me behind them. I want the lancers out in front in a double line. And I want the cuirassiers, which were something else in the game, but they were basically heavy cavalry. I want them to follow behind, and I want the lancers to go this way, and the cuirassiers to go the other way, and whatever. Actually, they were cataphract. They were armored cavalry. But, I was giving these orders. Why? Because I had a bunch of elements. On the other hand, it's kind of hard if you reduce a player to a couple blocks. It's kind of hard for them to get into that. And their orders become very quick, very precise, because they don't have to worry about managing 6, 8, 10, 12 blocks. And I've seen people do that. I've done that myself, give players 12 blocks. Oh my gosh, it becomes a nightmare for the umpire. It takes the player time to process the report to write orders for 12 different blocks. Even if they move them as a group, they're not going to always move them as a group. Sooner or later, they're going to start splitting off blocks and doing crazy things. Then you as an umpire, you have to roll a die for each of those. So you want to minimize that, and the way that you minimize that is by saying, no, you're going to have maybe a maximum of 6 blocks. You want to give players like 4 blocks probably as a minimum, and then 6 blocks kind of at a high end to keep a game manageable and turns slow, or I'm sorry, keep turns fast. Anytime you start giving players more than maybe half a dozen blocks, you really get in a situation where they're going to start, these guys go here, these guys go here, and this, that, and the other thing, and it starts to slow the game down. 6 blocks seems to be, kind of happy medium, but the high end of the happy medium. 4 blocks is it starts to feel like you didn't give me a very big command. It's like me and 2 guys. What is that? That's not even fun, right? It is fun, and I've had fun commanding as few as 2 blocks. I've even gone out and ended up commanding just 1 block before. And you do have fun, so don't assume that if I don't give my players 20 blocks to command, they're not going to have a good time. Absolutely not. They'll have fun with just 1 block, if you run a game that moves at an acceptable pace and you have a compelling or engaging scenario and all of that. So don't be afraid to curtail the number of blocks that are involved in the game. You don't have to give them these mad, huge, massive armies to keep them compelled. Okay. The other thing that I would suggest is you have to have a lot of discipline, whoever the lead umpire is. And by the way, I've mentioned Justin here. I don't want to imply that I think Justin is not a competent lead umpire. He's actually probably better at it than I am. And I don't want anyone to tie my commentary to my recent experience with him because he's my favorite umpire by far, I think. Um, so please don't interpret this. These comments are offered in general, just to be clear there. Now, um, what you do is you follow what I call the cadence. And the cadence goes like this. You begin with reports to the players. So you start, your first thing is a report. All players should receive some kind of a report that tells them here is what you have going on. Okay, so number one is report. It's the report, right? Okay, I'll just put an R because if I spell out report, you'll see how awful my handwriting is. But you start with the report, right? Players then begin to think about their report. You have to give them a minute or two to think. That's reasonable. I know of scenarios or umpires who will say you get 3 seconds, you get 30 seconds, you get 60 seconds, and then if you don't come back to me with an order, that's it. Okay, I get that if you want to create this high pressure, high stakes game, it's probably great for actual military training and exercises, which they do. They play Kriegsspiel to train for the military still. But if you're playing in a hobby group like we are, the IKS, give them at least a couple minutes to think. And besides, as an umpire, you probably have to give more than one report. So you go give the first report, go give the second report, maybe there's a third or even a fourth. Hopefully not more than that, because that's too much for you as an umpire to handle. 4 players is all I would suggest an umpire handle at the maximum. But anyway, you give the reports. Preferably 1 umpire, 2 players, give 2 reports, and when you're done giving the second report, you go back to the first player. At that point, the first player should be able to give you orders. So now you take orders. Okay, you take the orders, and that's it. You make sure that everything is clear and understood. Make sure that you, as the umpire, know what the orders are. You might do what I do, which is you might say, well, I'm here and I want to move over here, and so I will draw an arrow on the umpire map to show what the player order is, whatever the order is. If I want the unit to go and deploy in line and hold a position, I'll draw something like that. If they're just going to march, it's an arrow. If they're going to retreat, I draw a squiggly line like this, whatever. That's what I do. I have my own little shorthand or my own way of drawing the orders out on the map. You use whatever works for you. But I do suggest drawing things because that helps to keep you from forgetting. It allows you to remember. And it allows other umpires, if they're at the table, to see also what's going on. Okay? Next, you go back to the lead umpire, and the lead umpire, whether it's you or someone else, then processes the orders. Okay, and what you do if you are the lead umpire is you go to the first guy and you say, okay, what are the player's orders? And the umpire will give you the player orders, and he'll say, oh, I want him to advance to here and hold. Okay, you draw that. You don't necessarily have to move the piece. I would draw it. You can move the piece, especially if there's nothing that's going to interfere with the movement. Otherwise, you draw it. And then you go to the umpire on the other side. It might be the same guy, it might be a different guy, but whoever is umpiring on the other side, what are your orders? Well, we're going to march to here, okay, like that. All right, so now as an umpire, I know that when I average these 2 moves out, I'm going to have some kind of contact here. So I'm going to move a piece here, and these other guys are going to go in line right about here, and there's going to be a fight, okay? So you do all of the movements, and then once all the movements are done, then you do the combats, right? Okay, so now we're going to get a die, and we're going to calculate the odds and whatever system we're going to use, and then we're going to grab a die, and we're going to roll the die. We're going to figure what the modifiers are, all of the things that we do to run a turn. And then okay, there we go. We have a result on the die, and then we process that result. Okay, these guys fall back, these guys fall back. Neither one of them wanted any piece of this. Okay, and then you give it back to the umpires, whether that's you or somebody else, to go and give reports back to the players. So you process the turn, and then you go back to step number 1. And that's really how it is. Now, as the lead umpire, your job, your solemn job, perhaps your most important responsibility, is to keep this thing moving. And that means that you can't get into conversations. And that's a problem. And frankly, you're only human. And you're going to get, observers. You're going to get fellow umpires. You're going to get your friends who pop in, and they're going to say, "Oh, hey, Joe, Billy, Bob, what's going on? Hey, oh man, good times, good times. How's the wife and kids and all of that. And you're going to have these side conversations. You're going to start talking about, well, once I was in this Kriegsspiel and this happened and whatever. Okay. The problem with all that is, again, that takes time. If you are supposed to be processing a turn, and you are having one of those side conversations, you are slowing down the experience for everybody. You are subtracting from the experience. So I would suggest to people, it's okay to pop in to observe games and to talk about, the family, the vacation, the work, the things, whatever, the big Kriegsspiel, whatever you think it is. That's absolutely okay. I want to encourage that. After all, this is a social activity for us. We're here to have fun. However, when it's time to process the turn and roll the dice, zip it and focus on your duty. Focus on what you're supposed to be doing. Because those side conversations, you don't think they take very long. They actually do. They take way longer than you think. Imagine a time when you really wanted to go and do something when you were a kid and your parent was having a conversation with somebody else, and you're like, "Come on, I want to go, let's go," and you're tugging at their pant leg, and that conversation just goes. To a person engaged in a conversation, it's not a lot of time, but to the players who are sitting here waiting, oh, gee, what do we do now? What time? When's the next report going to be? Well, especially if they're hanging out in a room all by themselves and they don't have anyone else to chat to, that begins to drag. And the problem with all of this is not only do you slow down the game and you don't get through as much of the battle as you other players might like to get through, you end up in a situation where players like, well, I'd like to play Kriegsspiel, but I don't have 6 hours. Or I don't have 4 hours. Maybe I have 4 hours, but I don't want to spend 4 hours waiting for 30, 40 minutes to get 5 minutes of interaction with an umpire. And okay, now it's another 30 minutes. I guess I'll go make breakfast or something. I don't know. You want to minimize all that. The best games are the ones where you turn in your orders, you wait maybe 5 minutes, where you as a player say, I got to go to the bathroom, I'm going to run to the bathroom, and I'm going to run right back because I know the umpire is going to be right back with the result. And in order to do that, again, you have to maintain the cadence discipline. You have to minimize the minutia so that players are not commanding massive armies, so instead of something like this, I'm being a little ridiculous here, but instead of commanding a force like that, they're commanding a force, like that. Okay, you've got to minimize that stuff. And then the other thing is make sure that you're just enforcing that discipline. There was one other tip I was going to share, and I can't remember it now because I was being silly with the blocks. But again, you got to keep these things moving because if you don't, I think it impacts who comes back for the next game. Play by post is an exception to all of this. If you're playing by post, you have all the time in the world. You can add all the minutia to the system that you want. You can roll for morale. You can roll for, or you can keep tabs of supply, keep the tabs of ammunition and such down to the individual soldiers. You can keep track of casualties, and these are wounded, and these are deceased, and these have fled and disappeared, captured, whatever. Do all of that in your play-by-post if you want, but in a live game, you really do have to focus on the bare essentials of Kriegsspiel and focus on that with iron discipline. And there are going to be times when you're going to have to crack a whip at your own umpires or the other players. And worst case, and I have done this before, but on very rare occasion, if a player has too many questions or they're indecisive and they're not ready with that order, sorry man, time's up, you know. So very important to maintain that discipline and to follow those tips. Don't give them too many pieces. If there's going to be a march to contact, get their routes and then advance the game to that point. You don't have to stop here, here, and here, and here, and here, and get new orders. Because all they're going to do when that happens is they're going to get bored and they're going to generate work for you. They're going to generate mail. They're going to start writing dispatches. Hey, Billy Bob, what's going on? No contact with the enemy here. Really? And Billy Bob will come back and say, well, no contact with the enemy here, but wow, you know, look at the beautiful trees in the distance, and you know, I wish I were doing something else, you know. What? No, I throw those dispatches away, by the way, just so you know. So if you never get a response to your pointless or meaningless dispatch, it's because it ended up in the trash. In fact, I think we even have a meme for that right here. It's close enough. So, you know, there went the audio, but there we are. But yeah, I just toss it because I don't have time for that, and neither do you as a player. Well, you as a player probably do. But if players are generating dispatches like that, either tell them don't or don't deliver it or whatever. Don't reward that behavior. Don't encourage it because, again, you want to keep the busy work on the umpires down to a minimum because you got a game to run and a battle to get through. And I assure you, most players, if given the choice, would you rather have shorter turns and get through more turns, or would you rather model all these different little details and minutia and have all of this message traffic flying around? Most of the players are going to say, you know, I'd rather have those extra turns. I'd rather have faster turns. It's more important than the minutia. If you don't believe me now, if you're sitting here at the end of this podcast, you're like, I don't know, Marshall. I don't know. Try it out. Test it. A, B it. Good. Do it my way. Do it your way, and see what the players like. And here's the next thing I'll tell you. Whatever conclusion you come to, do that. Do that. Okay, so if you are playing with a group of grognards and you guys really want to model down to the individual cartridge and the individual casualty, and you want to roll morale dice and all of that, and did these guys eat lunch or not, or whatever, if that's what you want to do it. Even though I tell you it's probably not a good idea, do it because the ultimate purpose of all of this exercise is to have a good time. And if that's how you have a good time, far be it from me to tell you. But I will say, for those of you who want to get through a game in, let's say, 3 to 4 hours, which is a nice sweet spot for a Kriegsspiel game, and you want to get enough turns in, and you want players to come back and play again because they had this really cool, memorable experience, you're probably going to have to follow a number of these tips and suggestions that I've given you here today. All right. Once again, I'll tap the sign and say to keep content like this coming, please like and subscribe or join or whatever the patreon.com/Kriegsspiel. The link is in the YouTube comments. I want to thank you all for being here, and I am going to see you on the next adventure. Thank you all. Take care. Goodbye for now.